Former Iowa head coach Lisa Bluder had a
This kid is going to be pretty.
Former Iowa head coach Lisa Bluder had a premonition. This kid was going to be absolutely electric. Lisa Bluder sat there in total silence for 17 agonizing seconds before she finally let the words out. The reporter had tossed out a seemingly harmless question about Caitlin Clark's lasting legacy at Iowa. But the response that followed was anything but standard. You want the honest truth? Bluder's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Caitlin was completely impossible to coach. But not in the way you might assume. The entire room went dead silent. This wasn't the media-trained soundbite everyone anticipated from the legendary Hawkeye skipper. This was a raw confession, a secret she had guarded since Clark's very first practice back in 2020. And once the floodgates opened, there was simply no stopping her. People look at the broken records, the sold-out arenas, the Player of the Year trophies, and they assume having Caitlin was like playing with a stacked deck. But they have absolutely no idea what went down when the cameras were off. They didn't see the moments that almost tore us apart. Just picture this for a second. Lisa Bluder stalked the Iowa sidelines for 24 seasons. She has witnessed era-defining talent, constructed dynasties, and weathered every storm college hoops could throw at her. Yet, during her 4-year run with Caitlin Clark, she faced something entirely different. It was a phenomenon that completely deconstructed her understanding of the profession. Not because Clark had an attitude problem or was unteachable, but because of a much deeper complication. The moment I knew Caitlin was uncoachable, Bluder went on, hit me during a timeout her freshman year. The realization was sudden and absolute, she continued. We were trailing by 15. I sketched out a play, just a standard motion offense set. Nothing fancy. Caitlin glanced at the whiteboard, locked eyes with me, and dropped 8 words that shifted the entire paradigm. Bluder paused, replaying that memory as if it had unfolded yesterday. The gravity of that exchange was still etched clearly across her features. That huddle declaration would become the defining struggle of Bluder's entire tenure. Not for being insolent, and certainly not for being incorrect, but because it exposed a reality that would loom over every drill, every strategy session, and every game for the next 4 years. Clark wasn't merely a soldier following orders on the hardwood. She was a savant operating on a wavelength that most coaches couldn't even tune into. She said, "Coach, I see something they don't expect." That was it. 8 simple words. But right then, I knew my role had fundamentally shifted. I wasn't just coaching an athlete anymore. I was attempting to bottle a thunderstorm. The impossible part wasn't her skill set. It wasn't about her swagger, her shooting range, or her court vision. The problem was that Caitlin played on pure instinct at a level that rendered traditional coaching useless. How are you supposed to instruct someone who processes the action faster than you can draw a line with a marker? How do you lead a player whose basketball IQ makes your entire playbook look like a set of training wheels? Bluder's admission strikes a chord far deeper than just hoops. It speaks to a universal truth about greatness and the heavy burden of leadership. The strange weight of guiding a prodigy whose gifts far outstrip your ability to control them. Suddenly, every timeout morphed into a high-stakes negotiation. Every substitution felt like you were interrupting a maestro mid-symphony. Every defensive tweak had to factor in the reality that Clark saw lanes and angles invisible to everyone else. And that was merely the tip of the iceberg, because what Bluder shared next about their dynamic was even more intense. She spoke of the late nights where Clark would linger after practice, firing off questions. Questions with no easy answers, fueled by a pressure that nearly consumed them both. Completely flips the script on everything we assumed about that legendary 4-year run in Iowa City. You have to look at what happened after the gym lights dimmed to get the real scoop. When the rest of the squad packed up, Caitlin stayed behind, not hoisting shots or running suicides, but just parking herself at midcourt. With Bluder, firing off questions that felt less like hoops talk and more like existential riddles. Coach, consider this. What if our entire approach to the sport is flawed? Caitlin posed one evening in February 2021. That query lingered in the empty arena, heavy and suffocating. Bluder had 30 years of clipboard experience, yet no player had ever thrown her a curveball like that. Certainly not with that tone, a bizarre cocktail of pure wonder and dead serious certainty. It wasn't arrogance, Bluder clarified later, her voice trembling just a bit. She perceived a layer of mayhem and order that was completely invisible to me. Caitlin would break down tape and identify a defensive switch, 2 full passes before the defense even shifted. She could feel the energy of the game turn before the tide actually rolled in. It felt like trying to mentor a psychic who lived 30 seconds ahead of reality. However, that is exactly where the narrative gets messy. Possessing that level of savant-like brilliance carried attacks so heavy, it almost broke them both. See, when your brain decodes the court, unlike anyone else's, computing data at a rate that makes real time look like slow motion, you end up incredibly lonely. Caitlin wasn't, merely isolated at the scoring summit. She was solitary in her very grasp of what was attainable. Everything came to a head during a punishing away stretch in January of 2022. The Hawkeyes had dropped back-to-back games, and the press started doubting the whole operation. Caitlin had been awake for 3 straight days, obsessively looping the same plays. On repeat, desperate to find a way to shoulder more weight, to reach flawless execution. Bluder stumbled upon her in the hotel foyer at 3 a.m, weeping in front of a glowing laptop screen. That moment hit me with a hard reality, Bluder confessed. My job wasn't to refine Caitlin's jump shot, it was to save Caitlin from herself. The very superpower that made her great was tearing her apart. Her vision was too sharp, her emotions too raw, her burden too heavy. What they discussed next completely rewired their relationship. Bluder gave her advice that would seem ludicrous to the average person. Quit striving for perfection. Just aim for humanity. But Caitlin's reply exposed exactly why she was a coaching nightmare. She stared right at Bluder and whispered, "Coach, I have no idea how to hit the kill switch." Once I step between those lines, I visualize every error before it materializes. Every blown coverage, every poor choice. It's all visible, and I can't blind myself to it. That wasn't ego speaking, it was the sound of a curse. She was crushed by a perspective that made her liable for every play, answering for every soul, locked in a pursuit of excellence with no upper limit. It dawned on Bluder right then that she wasn't guiding a prodigy. She was managing a mind, inhabiting a tactical dimension closed off to the rest of the world. Their joint remedy didn't just overhaul the program, it redefined our comprehension of sporting mastery. Bluder refused to bottle up that talent or dumb it down with rigid rules. Rather, she executed a move that defied every principle she'd learned in 24 years on the sideline. She built a framework engineered to break down on purpose, a strategic glitch meant to compel Caitlin to face the single variable her intellect couldn't compute: disorder. Raw, improvised, magnificent anarchy. What followed would trigger the most legendary run this program had ever witnessed. Orchestrated mayhem, that was the name Bluder gave it. Yet, when she first unleashed the concept, her staff looked at her like she needed a psych evaluation. 10 straight minutes. 0 diagrams. 0 scripts. A structureless void. 5 athletes, 1 mandate, solve the puzzle. Clark froze at the logo, bewildered. Never before in her career had the correct move been missing. There was no flawless read, no calculated risk, only raw gut feeling fighting total disorder. Then the impossible occurred. A chuckle escaped her lips. Genuine laughter. The crushing weight on her shoulders finally started to fracture. I saw her brick or fumble 17 consecutive plays. Bluder recalls a grin emerging amidst the wreckage of errant passes and airballs. Yet with each screw-up, she seemed to float higher. Messing up wasn't a sin anymore, it was the objective. But the squad saw the real truth. Monica Gennano grabbed the coach after that wild session, eyes welling up, not out of anger, but pure relief. "Coach," she whispered. She said, for the first time in 2 years, Caitlin is actually playing the game, not just putting on a show. That subtle shift changed the universe, the gap between competing and entertaining. It was the chasm between passion and duty, between flowing and thinking. Bluder had stumbled upon the catalyst that would redefine their campaign. The issue wasn't her otherworldly talent. It was the demand to be flawless. So the strategy shifted. The coach would stop play and refuse to speak. She initiated rotations just to break their flow. She designed plays destined to collapse, demanding improvisation instead of execution. To an outsider, it looked like incompetence. It felt like professional self-destruction. Reporters began to whisper that the locker room was gone. And then the Michigan showdown arrived. February 2022. The pivot point. Trailing by 18 with 12 minutes on the clock. The season hung in the balance. Their rank teetered on the edge. Bluder signaled for time, locked eyes with her star, and dropped 3 words. Ditch the script. The aftermath defies logic. Clark launched 11 attempts in 4 minutes. Sank 3, dished 7 assists, coughed it up twice. Analytically, it was a disaster. But on the scoreboard, a 9-point victory. She closed out the final 8 minutes with a liberation unseen since her playground days. I get asked about that rally constantly. Bluder confessed later, leaning in, eyes lighting up at the recollection. Everyone hunts for the tactical shift, the magic whiteboard drawing. Honest answer, we quit managing. We let Caitlin breathe in the storm. Because the storm was her natural habitat. Yet, this philosophy carried a price tag that would challenge their very foundation. When you engineer anarchy and unteach a prodigy, you dance on the razor's edge between glory and catastrophe. The NCAA tournament approached. With the ante raised, Bluder realized that by making her star unmanageable, she had unleashed an unforeseen force. The ring shattered the silence at 2 a.m., 3 days pre-tip-off. It was Caitlin. Her tone had shifted, a serenity that felt lethal. Coach, she started, I finally cracked the code. I know what you've been up to. I know why you've been grinding us down, why you chose the rocky path every single time. Bluder felt her pulse skip a beat. She knew whatever Clark said next would prove she had unlocked a level of self-awareness that 99% of athletes never reach. A revelation that was about to transform the tournament into a showcase of absolute, controlled destruction. You stopped coaching me a long time ago, Clark's voice crackled over the line. You're training me to trust my gut when the wheels fall off. Because in the clutch, when the whiteboard is useless, that's all you have left. Bluder sat in the shadows of her living room, receiver pressed tight to her ear. Stunned that her 22-year-old prodigy had just reverse-engineered her entire philosophy. Clark didn't let up, her tone steady but piercing. Any decent player can follow a script. But what do you do when the script burns? What about the final 2 minutes when the plan goes to hell? That is exactly what you've been readying me for. A heavy silence hung in the air. She was spot on. All those messy scrimmages, the calculated disasters, the times Bluder stayed mute, it wasn't just tactics. She was forging an ironclad belief in the unpredictable, pure instinct, finding peace in the eye of the storm. Then Clark added, there's one more thing. I've been running the numbers. Over the last 17 games, every time you burned a timeout and just stared at me without a word. We went on a 47-19 run in the next 3 minutes. That isn't luck. It's liberation. That was the beautiful contradiction of handling a talent like Caitlin Clark. Strip away the scaffolding, and she became a giant. The less you interfered, the brighter she shined. It defied every rule in the coaching manual. It flew in the face of everything Bluder had spent a career establishing. Yet the stats were irrefutable, and the evolution on the court was undeniable. Tip-off was 3 days away, and the whole globe was tuning in. ESPN had lenses trained on every step the Hawkeyes took. The weight of expectation was crushing, prompting Bluder to make a gamble that would either be her masterpiece or her ruin. She ditched the script, literally. She took the season's offensive schemes and left them gathering dust back in Iowa City. Her staff was on the verge of a collective nervous breakdown. Lisa, are you insane? If we advance, we've got South Carolina waiting. Dawn Staley runs the tightest defensive ship in the nation. We need blueprints. We need order. But Bluder recalled the look she imagined in Clark's eyes during that call. It wasn't swagger. It was something profound. Total surrender to the moment. That first tournament practice was absolute bedlam. No drills, no sets, just 5-on-5 with bizarre stipulations shifting on a dime. Weak hand only. No dribbling. If you take a standard jumper, you lose. The squad looked bewildered and annoyed, but Clark, she was lighting it up. She was conjuring shots from the ether, finding geometric impossibilities, throwing passes that defied logic yet found their mark. Kate Martin stumbled over to Bluder during a hydration break, drenched in sweat and mentally fried. Coach, seriously? What is this? We aren't even playing hoops right now. Bluder's reply would go down in Hawkeye history. Precisely. We're done playing basketball. We're playing jazz now, and Caitlin is our Miles Davis. But the true gauntlet awaited. Dawn Staley had been studying the tape, and she was ready. Staley had the blueprint. She had dissected every habit and mapped every predictable rhythm in Clark's arsenal. Her defensive strategy was a masterclass that had already choked the life out of every other sharpshooter they had encountered. But Staley was missing one crucial piece of intel. Iowa had burned their playbook. They weren't just pivoting, they had completely nuked the concept of structure. It was like walking into a grandmaster chess tournament and flipping the table over before the first pawn moved. On the morning of the showdown, Clark fired a text to Bluder with 4 words that would set the tone for the war to come. Let's wreck their scheme. South Carolina thought they were ready for any scenario. Staley's game plan was a work of art, engineered to suffocate Clark from every conceivable angle. We're talking box and one, shifting triangles, face guarding denial, and double teams launching from the logo. They had invested 14 days of intense drilling to memorize every one of Iowa's offensive rotations. The snag? Iowa didn't run a solitary play they had rehearsed all year. The opening sequence dragged on for a grueling 31 seconds. Clark handled the rock 4 separate times, never took more than 2 dribbles, somehow miraculously dished out a dime to McKenna Warnock for a corner triple. Staley burned a timeout just 90 seconds after tip-off. Her defensive coordinator stood there clutching a clipboard stacked with scouting intel that was suddenly worth less than the paper it was printed on. They aren't running schemes, he stammered, totally lost. It's just raw street ball. Years later, Bluder would recount that matchup eyes glazed over, replaying the tape in her mind as the absolute peak of their journey. We hung 77 points on the tightest defensive unit in the nation. And I didn't signal for a single set piece, not a one. My only instruction to Caitlin was, read the floor, feel the flow, trust your gut, but the highlight tapes leave out the dark side. By the time the halftime horn blew, Clark was completely drained. It wasn't physical fatigue. Her brain was fried, operating without a net, improvising inside a hurricane that burns a different type of fuel. Imagine trying to speak a language fluently while you are inventing the vocabulary in real time. Every single touch demanded 100% mental acuity, total spontaneity, and a reliance on wild instincts that traditional coaching tries to beat out of you. During the break, Clark isolated herself in the locker room corner, eyes shut tight, chest heaving. The squad assumed she was mentally running through plays. But Bluder knew the truth. She was clearing the cache, fighting to remain in that fugue state where conscious thought dies, where the game turns into free-form jazz, and the impossible feels destined. I made my way over to her spot. Bluder recalled how her voice dipped to a whisper. Clark cracked her eyes open and dropped a line that still haunts me. She whispered, "Coach, the whole picture is right there, but I can't keep a grip on it. It is like trying to catch water with your bare hands. The second I try to analyze it, it is gone." That was the moment Bluder finally grasped why Clark was uncoachable in the traditional sense. It went way beyond her raw talent, her court vision, or her shooting distance. She lived in the gap between thought and reflex, a zone you cannot teach, you cannot organize, and you can only try to safeguard. And guarding that spark meant doing the exact reverse of everything a basketball coach is programmed to do. That second half against South Carolina is now mythology. Clark dropped 23 points on plays that defied categorization. No set designs, no labels. The data guys couldn't even figure out how to input the possessions into their spreadsheets. She was inventing a style of play that the dictionary hadn't caught up to yet. Staley later described it as the most gorgeous demolition of a strategy I have ever seen. But the toll was mounting. Once the final buzzer sounded, Clark crumpled in the tunnel. Not because her legs gave out, but crushed by the sheer burden of surviving on that razor's edge between brilliance and madness for 40 solid minutes. Medics sprinted onto the court, but Bluder signaled them to stop. She understood the diagnosis instantly. The crash had been inevitable for weeks. Folks assume mastery makes the game simple, Bluder said, her voice trembling slightly. But the reality for Caitlin was that every match in this bracket felt like performing open-heart surgery while conducting an orchestra and solving quantum mechanics. Her mind was, spinning at a velocity that was incinerating her nervous system from the inside out. The Elite Eight loomed just 5 days away. Tennessee was ready for war, and Clark was fracturing under the crushing weight of her own god-tier talent. Bluder's next move, the strategy she chose for that 5-day gap, would either rescue Clark's future or burn their entire legacy to the ground. That evening, she picked up the phone to reach a veteran who had navigated this minefield, a legend who knew the curse of being transcendent. The dialogue that ensued would shift the tectonic plates of their season. 3 rings echoed on the line before the click. Diana Taurasi, the undisputed queen of the court, a titan who shouldered a pressure most athletes can't even comprehend. Bluder had never dialed this number, but she was backed into a corner. Diana, I'm in trouble. She's slipping away. It's not physical. She's being consumed by her own mind. Taurasi stayed silent for 45 minutes while Bluder poured it all out. The erratic system, the grueling tournament run, the meltdown in the hallway. How Clark's eyes went vacant at the buzzer, as if pieces of her soul were being siphoned off permanently. As Bluder wound down, the dead air on the call felt infinite. You want the hard truth? Taurasi finally spoke, her tone heavy with decades of battle scars. You've unleashed a monster. You taught her the password to that forbidden zone where immortality resides, but you never gave her the map to get home. Bluder felt the blood drain from her face. What do you mean, come back? When you operate at that altitude, Taurasi clarified, surfing pure adrenaline and instinct, you aren't really present. Your physical shell is on the hardwood, but your consciousness has ascended to a different plane. It is the ultimate high in athletics, but re-entry, returning to Earth, gets tougher every single time. I've seen legends get lost in that labyrinth. They hunt that feeling. They crave it. And in the end, it devours them. The warning hit hard. Bluder recognized the symptoms immediately. Clark lingering in the gym, desperate to spark that lightning again. Clark studying game tape, not for strategy, but just to feel the rush of the memory. Clark drifting further away, locking herself inside a mental fortress where no one else was invited. How do I fix this? Bluder pleaded, panic setting in. You need to install an off switch. Establish hard borders. You must let her be average occasionally. If she lives in the stratosphere for every match, she'll be ash before she hits 25. I've watched it destroy prodigies with more raw gift than you or I combined. They stayed on the line for another hour. Taurasi opened up the vault, revealing secrets she kept from the press. The heavy tax of being the best, the crushing isolation of perceiving the game in a code no one else can read, and the bonds that shattered because normal people can't comprehend the burden of the crown. When they finally hung up, Bluder wiped tears from her face. Dawn broke, and she summoned the squad. But the playbook for Tennessee wasn't on the agenda. It wasn't about strategy or analyzing the opposition. The stakes were infinitely higher. She locked eyes with Clark, who was huddled in the back with exhaustion painted beneath her lashes, and dropped a statement that sucked the air out of the room. Caitlin, I'm giving you the green light to screw up. And I don't mean just in drills. When we face Tennessee, I want you to brick shots intentionally. Throw bad passes, deliberately. Allow yourself to be mediocre for a while, because this pace, it's going to destroy you. The silence was deafening. The squad looked around, bewildered. The coaching staff shifted in their seats, uneasy. Clark sat frozen, unblinking, trying to compute the impossible request. Coach, she finally choked out, her voice splintering. You don't get it. If I quit, even for a heartbeat, I'm terrified I'll never find the path back. That zone you helped me unlock? It's the only sanctuary where the world makes sense. Take that away, and I'm just a kid with a ball. Bluder crossed the floor, knelt by her star, and gripped her hands. Her next words would either salvage the player or shatter her spirit. Caitlin, that zone isn't you. It's a destination. But you have to live here, with us, in the mundane. Because legends can't survive in the extraordinary. They visit and they bring back trophies. Tears flooded Clark's eyes. 4 years of crushing expectations. 4 years of being the solution to every problem. 4 years of hoisting an entire sport on her 22-year-old back. The dam finally broke right there in that moment. And that raw exchange between mentor and protege would completely rewrite the script for the Tennessee showdown. Clark went mute for the rest of the day. She holed up in her suite, eyes fixed on the plaster above, rewinding the tape of her life back to the first time she touched leather. The gravity of Bluder's words sank into her marrow. A license to mess up, to be average, to be a person. That evening, she broke a 4-year streak. She dialed her mom. Not to talk shop, not to dissect plays or vent about the crushing expectations, just to hear a familiar tone, to recall the person she was before she morphed into Caitlin Clark, the phenomenon before she became an impossibility. Mom, she, breathed into the receiver at 2 a.m. I've forgotten what normal feels like. I don't remember how to just exist without an audience, without every action carrying a hidden meaning. Her mother just listened, offered no quick fixes, didn't try to repair the damage. She simply reminded her daughter of the little girl who used to launch shots in the driveway until the street lamps buzzed on. Not for the record books, not for a free ride, not for a legacy, just because it felt like soaring. The energy against Tennessee was shifted. You could taste it. Clark clanked her opening trio of attempts. Not intentionally, she just missed. But instead of the typical anxiety tightening the squad's chest, a miracle occurred. She grinned, actually flashed a smile after a brick. The roster caught it. The bench noticed. Bluder saw it and finally let out a breath she'd been holding for weeks. That grin shifted the axis, Bluder later confessed to the press. It signaled that she got it. She quit performing. She started playing. It's a nuance the average viewer misses, but for us coaches, it hits us in the gut. Playing is liberation. Performing is a cage. Tennessee had game planned for a hurricane, the unstoppable force that shredded South Carolina's blueprints. Instead, they faced something far more lethal. She was finally a competitor who stopped chasing the ghost of flawlessness. She had absolutely nothing left to prove to the critics. She'd been granted the liberty to crash and burn, and strangely, that permission stripped away every ounce of terror. Everything clicked into place during the second quarter. Clark slashed along the baseline, got boxed in by a pair of defenders, and ran out of real estate. The vintage version of Caitlin would have tried to conjure a miracle out of thin air. She would have forced the issue. But this version, she kicked it out to Gabby Marshall and trotted back to cover her zone. Basic, routine, forgettable. Marshall drained the triple. But the basket wasn't the headline. The headline was Clark's body language immediately after. She pointed right at Gabby, hyping up her teammates' glory, fading into the collective unit rather than trying to be the entire show. The Iowa sideline went absolute ballistic, shouting, not because of the scoreboard, but because of the evolution playing out right in front of them. I witnessed her make a conscious decision to be smaller in that moment, Bluder said, her voice cracking with emotion, and it made her bigger. For once, they weren't orbiting Caitlin, they were moving with her. The entire vibe on the court transformed. Iowa took it by 14. Clark bagged 28 points, but the box score missed the real story. She only tried to muscle through a bad look 2 times the entire night. In past tournament runs, you'd see that count hit double digits easily. She was mastering the art of allowing the game to unfold naturally, rather than strangling it into submission. But the Final Four was looming on the horizon, and the challenge waiting in the wings threatened to dismantle everything they'd constructed in ways no one foresaw. It's funny, just when you learn to release your grip on being the hero, the universe throws you into a fire where stepping back is fatal. The squad, waiting for them, had a singular objective: crush Caitlin Clark's soul. They dedicated a fortnight to blueprinting her destruction. Then, 2 days before tip-off, the intel leaked. A loose lip on the opposing coaching staff, maybe on purpose, maybe a slip-up, spilled the guts to a beat writer. When Bluder scanned the document, her veins turned to ice. This wasn't X's and O's. This was straight-up psychological combat. Directive 1, attack her psyche, force an emotional snap. Infiltrate her head before she finds a groove. Hammer her physically on every single possession. Chirp at her relentlessly. Harp on the fatigue, the crushing pressure. Remind her of the millions counting on her. Crack the armor, and the game falls apart. They weren't scheming to defend a point guard. They were scheming to dismantle a human being. Every practice session for 2 weeks focused on one thing, piling on the stress until Clark imploded. Bluder pulled her inner circle into a locked room. The argument got heated fast. Do they read Clark in on the enemy's playbook? Do they armor her up for the onslaught? Or shield her eyes from the ugly truth? Is it better to let her play free, ignorant of the target painted on her back? Her right-hand coach stood firm. She has to know. We can't send her into a slaughterhouse blindfolded. If they come for her head and she doesn't know why, she'll spin out. But Bluder wavered. Something about the previous fortnight had softened Clark. The heart-to-heart with her mom, that Tennessee match, the grin after bricking shots. Her recovery was delicate, almost fragile. Would dropping this bombshell wreck the foundation they'd just poured? She bit the bullet. She laid it all out for Clark. They sat in Bluder's suite, the leaked dossier scattered over the mattress like exhibits in a murder investigation. Clark scanned every single word, taking her time to absorb the text. When she finally looked up, her reaction threw Bluder completely off guard. No rage, no terror, no grit, just a simple inquiry. Coach, you think they're onto something? You think I'm going to crack? The question hovered in the air, heavy and suffocating. Truth be told, Bluder had no clue. She'd watched Clark crumble in stadium tunnels and sob at 3 a.m. She knew exactly how heavy the crown lay on this girl's head. She'd seen the fractures up close, but she'd also noticed something else stirring in the wreckage. A shift that had surfaced only in the last fortnight. A piece of the puzzle that wasn't there before. Here's what I think, Bluder said, measuring her words. You already broke, kid, and yet here you are. That's a fair point. Clark nodded slowly, then pulled a move nobody saw coming. She busted out laughing, not a nervous titter, but a deep, belly-shaking roar that echoed off the walls. They seriously think they can pressure me? Coach, I've been in the pressure cooker since 7th grade. I felt it when my best was garbage to them and my worst made the front page. There is nothing in their playbook I haven't already lived through. That laughter shifted the whole vibe because it wasn't about rebellion. It wasn't fake swagger. It was pure, unadulterated acceptance. A hard-won acknowledgement of her own history and battle scars. The kid who used to crumble under expectations had evolved into a warrior wearing that burden like a suit of armor. The Final Four tipped off exactly how the scouts predicted. Brutal physical contact on every drive and trash talk buzzing in her ear nonstop. You gassed, Caitlin? Whole world's watching. Heavy crown, huh? Don't fold now. Don't disappoint him. But Clark's comeback was one for the history books. 3rd time down the floor. After eating an elbow and hearing another nasty whisper, she pulled the trigger from 32 feet out. Swish. She turned to her guard and dropped a 5-word bomb that killed the noise. I'm already broken. Are you? The defender froze, struck dumb, because Clark wasn't bluffing. She'd shattered 1,000 times in locker room hallways, lonely hotel suites, and hysterical late-night calls to her mom. But falling apart hadn't finished her. It had liberated her. What Bluder saw over the next 35 minutes became the magnum opus of Clark's collegiate run. 41 points, 12 assists, 8 rebounds. Stats that belong in a museum. But the box score couldn't touch the reality of that night. Clark wasn't just playing a game out there. She was performing a public exorcism. Every inner demon, every lingering doubt, every toxic critique she'd swallowed for 4 years, she bled it all out onto the floor. The mind games didn't just fail, they blew up in the opponent's face. Every attempt to rattle her was met with a play that defied physics. A step-back 3 over a double team, a no-look dime that sliced the defense open like a surgeon's blade, a defensive stop that a player carrying her offensive burden had no business making. She wasn't just defeating them, she was schooling them. I've never witnessed anything like it, Bluder admitted in the interview. Her voice still trembled with awe months later. It wasn't just a hot streak. It was like she was battling every single person who ever said she couldn't cut it. To the skeptics claiming the weight would crush her, and the pundits tearing apart her. Game. To the rivals, sure she'd crumble, she was silencing every single doubt, play by play. But the sequence that truly immortalized the night happened with 4 minutes on the clock. The Hawkeyes sat comfortably on an 11-point cushion. No danger in sight. Time to coast. A standard guard would have milked the clock, guarded the advantage, and minimized the risk. But Caitlin flipped the script. She demanded the rock right at the mid-court stripe. The whole stadium sensed the impending storm. The defense felt it, her mentor felt it. 17,000 souls suspended their breathing. She locked eyes with Bluder on the sideline, a current passing between them. No tactical signals, no shouted orders, merely pure understanding, a silent salute to the odyssey they had navigated together. Then she launched from 37 feet out, a logo dagger, the sort of gamble that destroys reputations if it bricks. That sphere seemed to float in the heavens for an eternity. All the teachings, the tears, the late-night debates concerning stress, flawlessness, and the right to stumble, everything fused into that rotating leather orb. Swish. The building went nuclear. Yet, Caitlin remained stone-faced. She simply retreated to defend, expression serene, extending a finger toward the bench. That single motion spoke volumes. It screamed, "You constructed this. You rescued me. This belongs to us." At that juncture, the coach confessed, battling wet eyes. I understood what made her ungovernable. It wasn't the raw skill, not the obstinance, the court sight, or the distance. She required something missing from every playbook. She required liberation, not restraint. Release over rigidness, affection over administration. Then the clock hit 0. The Hawkeyes punched their ticket to the title bout. Caitlin had just executed arguably the finest solo showing the Final Four had ever witnessed. However, as the streamers rained down and the lenses focused in, the coach spotted a detail that froze her blood. Her star wasn't rejoicing with the squad. She stood isolated at the logo, gazing toward the ceiling, weeping openly. No happy crying here. This was visceral, a torrent held back for 4 long seasons. Bluder shoved through the mob to get to her side. Upon arrival, the player turned and whispered words that would ghost the coach eternally. A truth regarding the toll, a confession about the fragments of her soul traded for this status. Suddenly, the trophy match felt irrelevant. For what she disclosed concerning the cost of immortality would alter the coach's perspective forever. "Coach," she rasped through the sobbing, the title fight looming hours ahead. "I've lost the person I was outside of this. I surrendered it all to morph into this entity. All the bonds never formed. All the ordinary moments I bypassed. I murdered every facet of my existence that wasn't hoops, and I'm terrified." The coach stood frozen, paper scraps drifting down like a winter storm. Realization flooded her mind. This wasn't a party. It was a judgment day. The tears weren't for the victory. She wept because the triumph had stripped away parts of her humanity she might never reclaim. "I turned into something impossible," she went on, words faint amidst the bedlam. "Not unguardable, not unstoppable, just impossible to exist as. I transformed into a creature that can't survive beyond these lines, and I've forgotten how to switch back." That admission shattered every belief the coach held regarding the mentorship of legends. 4 seasons spent obsessed with the game, with schemes and growth and handling the heat. Yet, positioned there at the midcourt logo, standing on the hardwood, she realized the mission had never truly been about the game itself. "Caitlin," Bluder whispered, framing the girl's face in her palms, locking eyes despite the welling tears. "You didn't vanish to build this legacy. You revealed your true self. All those parties you skipped, every ordinary moment you swapped, you made those choices because this is your DNA, not just your day job. It is your soul. The arena doesn't dictate your value. You give meaning to the arena." Clark scanned her mentor's expression for validity, desperate for license to embrace a terrifying truth. The possibility that she wasn't damaged goods, that she was exactly the masterpiece she was destined to be. That kid launching jumpers in the driveway until the street lamps flickered to life. The coach pressed on. "She's still right here. She didn't leave. She just evolved." And maturing doesn't require you to abandon your heart. It means realizing your spirit is vast enough to hold it all. Silence stretched between them. Just a legend and her guide, 2 souls bound by the sport. Survivors of a storm neither had fully comprehended until that very second. Tomorrow meant the finals. The crushing weight would return. The lenses would focus. Yet, the tectonic plates of their dynamic had shifted forever. Coaching Clark wasn't a nightmare because of her gift. It was a challenge because her spirit craved nourishment the playbook couldn't offer. She required a voice to affirm that being a unicorn didn't mean being fractured, that devotion wasn't synonymous with losing out, and that the icon she is today was worth every single cost. Lisa tells this tale now, when rookies ask about the phenom, ignoring the stats, the clips, and the titles. She tells the real story, the raw one, about a 22-year-old weeping at the logo, scared to death of her own power, begging to be human. That is why she was the hardest assignment of my life, Lisa concluded in the interview. Because coaching suggests you are instructing a student on mechanics. Caitlin mastered the game long ago. She needed to be reminded she was a living, breathing girl inside the jersey. Sometimes, the MVP move for a mentor is to stop instructing entirely. Just hold space and tell them that the anomaly they've morphed into still deserves to be loved. The Iowa saga was never really about the buckets or the dimes. It was a chronicle of a girl realizing that being a god on the court doesn't mean forfeiting her humanity. That you can be an icon and still feel adrift. That you can shatter and still fuse back together stronger. And Lisa Bluder, she did a hell of a lot more than draw up plays for. They require mercy. They crave authorization to just be. Generational talents are difficult because they hunger for what drills cannot supply. Caitlin Clark. She was a lifeline, and in the trenches, she learned that they need a safety net when gravity finally takes hold. That is the true Iowa legacy. Her tone remains steady, though heavy with memory. It's why we'll never see it again. That is what made those 4 seasons absolutely impossible.